Greetings. Welcome to Wake the Dead. Today, we are extremely delighted to have returning guest and friend of the show, Carrie Olaje. Welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hi, Sean.
It's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming back. Our last episode was, for the viewers that want to know more about you, definitely need to go back and see our previous episodes. Your work is phenomenal, and you're doing wonderful things in the world to help survivors of trauma-based mind control. And you're a real juggernaut. Like you're really moving mountains with just your words and your actions. And we're so proud to have you here. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. I feel very honored by your intro, as always.
Well, yeah. I don't do much, but I mean, it's sincere every time. So that's all that matters, I think. But yes, you've done a lot for our heads to teach us about the reality of the hidden things of the dark occult. And today we're moving on from the last episode we talked about the reality of Eyes Wide Shut. And that's Kubrick is this side project that I've been really going into with my, rabbit hole investigations of Kubrick's films and his themes and subjects. And Eyes Wide Shut is very revelatory and revelatory of your story as well. So, because it was so similar to your story and the grooming and the occultedness of it, and it's a tool for helping to teach others about your reality and others like you, what they have endured. So that's why I brought it to the listener's attention like that. So everyone can see that Eyes Wide Shut's not just a movie. It's like, it's like you said, there's so much context that it's obvious. This is like he's telling us something very important. He's telling us about what is actually there. Under the dirty rock, like what kind of worms are living under there, and the bugs that nobody really looks at. And that's what you are, you had to live it. Those bugs personally. And, anyway, so that was quite an episode and extremely important for me and my understanding. Because like I look at that film so much and I look at that and for you to tell me like that really helped my brain to cognize the pieces and see how they fit so perfectly. And I'm always asking my guests, like my wife's telling me that, like, you're always asking about the hierarchy. Why are you always doing that? And it's true. Like, I always seem to want to know about, like, what, because it's like the order of obedience is if somebody's going to be obedient, then that is power and the nature of the evil power, to really understand how it works. And so this is where we're going today. We're going to be speaking about the Mothers of Darkness and the Black Awakening, this signal to the sleepers among the ones that are not healed yet and still have programming inside to cause chaos, so that the politicians and the New World Order can seize final control of hold of the world and begin their new world order takeover, continuation of government, all these things. And anyway, the Mothers of Darkness, there is a hierarchy, and it seems as though all the stories, they always mention how it's like the real life Bene Gesserit order, like of Dune, from the book Dune. There's like this these black witches that they tell who to mate with who, and who's going to do what role in what's part of society, and they seem to be ordering everything from above. And you seem to have some knowledge of this, so I was hoping that you could tell us about this order and your experiences with it. So I haven't let you say much yet, so I'll stop talking and go ahead and respond if you have something to say to that.
No, I'm good. I mean, I think you were doing a good job of just kind of like summarizing the last episode, how it kind of leads into this understanding. Because that's what we talked a lot about last episode was, the what Kubrick shows is the progression, from one role to another, basically in the life of like a monarch or ritual controlled slave, basically, mind controlled slave. That is essentially if you have been chosen to be part of the hierarchy, there's certain roles you'll play through depending on your age, and one progresses into another until you end up being like Alice and willing to set your, front life husband up with the cult, send your daughter, to the cult to essentially continue the same thing, if not her doing some of the programming herself, with the daughter. But that was a lot of like what you had picked up on, what I definitely had always like really, I don't know. Well, there's a lot of triggering stuff in that movie, but ultimately, yeah, it's like it mirrors like what I understood to be like the progression through a slave's life for not just myself, but like other ones that I knew, through childhood, programmers, etc. That it wasn't all men for sure. It's like it was women too, and it was, I don't even know how to describe it. I'm glad that you brought up Dune because it's
Right, it does fit, doesn't it? The Bene
I do
Gesserit.
enjoy the movies, but that's all I could think about. Like, especially watching this past series, essentially the whole time, because it very much focuses on the Bene Gesserit, and really goes into a lot of like their culture and imagery and stuff like that. And I don't know how much of that is original source material from the books and how much of it is like the Hollywood,
That movie, they stayed pretty
like
close.
method stuff, but
They stayed pretty close to the book. I mean, I read the first one. I don't know about the other
yeah,
ones.
imagery wise and archetype wise and everything. Yeah, like it was fun. I was kind of laughing a little bit when you mentioned Dune because yeah, having watched those, I was like, well, this is pretty much identical.
Right. Yeah.
This is like pretty much identical to like the affect and character and motivations and just a lot of different things, to really what I experienced, that it's this dark sisterhood, they're always wearing black robes, most of the time veiled, and it's like I guess what's seen as like, a fairly like elite magical order, within, this occult hierarchy, basically, because, we've talked about before that there's many different like specific religions, that all operate within underneath the same framework, Satanic, the Druidic, Masonic. There's, even different like actual religions that are inverted, basically, so like Catholicism or Mormonism or Judaism, cults that are essentially inverting their message, but they're all kind of going through the same steps, but that ultimately, when it comes to like the MWO type people and like the people that are like the hidden hand, I guess, in society, that psychopath class, that for them, those are all just like subsidiary of like the one true religion, which is essentially something that looks more at archetypes, essentially, isn't really it's not like the Satanists. It's not, that ultimately the people that we're talking about kind of follow, recognizing that there are deities that are more like archetypes that they, subscribe power to and worship, etc., but that they've had many names through the ages and through different like nationalities and stuff like that. But ultimately, there's not, at least in my understanding, because I can only speak to my experience, I'm like that's kind of was the important thing, that it's like I would get assigned an archetype, and within that you would have multiple altars that were different deities that fit the same archetype, essentially, because that's more what they're looking at, like the force of power or consciousness behind how that consciousness appeared in all different religions, essentially. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes. So it's the same dark evil that is presenting in humanity. Well, I don't know whether it's evil or dark or what, but it's the same energy that arises in humanity, like anger or fear or something. And it's like that archetype embodied perfectly. And you said it has many names, and it's gone through history. And so this is what I've been tracking, this and it's also in Eyes Wide Shut, this the cult of Ishtar, the maidens of Inanna, like the that whole the whores of Inanna, basically, of Ishtar. And this, so it was Inanna for Sumeria, it was Ishtar for Babylon, it was it was Sub-Sibyl for the Thracians, and it was like, Magna Mater for Romans, and it was that same deity again, that goddess energy. And and the Bible talked about it like Mystery Babylon that rode the cat beast with this the whore of Babylon. And that's the same thing. Crowley talks about it, like Crowley said that he was the mega Therion, the great beast, like he was the beast, and she's gonna ride him like into the whatever. And that union of the beast and the feminine is like Samael and Lilith, and it's the combination of the two opposites, and the creation of their dark magic, right? So like that fornication and that Hyros Gamos is what you performed. You were the priestess in this scenario where you took on the form of Ishtar. So in that sense, you are you're taking on the form of that sacred, the sacred horror of their religion. And it could be you are just one face of many that are all doing that same role all through time, right?
Yeah.
And you've been given your power, ordained or whatnot, by this cult of black witches, right? Do I understand that right?
Yeah. So no, totally. I think that the way what you're saying, how you're saying, is perfect.
Okay.
When it comes to like the main thing to keep in mind, from my understanding, the main thing to keep in mind with anything that's like goddess, the female magic side of this occult type of stuff, is that you're always going to have, and that's kind of what I was talking about a little bit before, talking about the progression, the different roles, is that you're always going to have, even in my experience, Hecate was one of the like deities that they saw as attached to me. That basically she's a triple faced goddess. You'll have the three come up over and over again when it comes to these, when it comes to the female goddess and witch type roles, is that you're always going to have, the different stages of a woman's life basically is what the magic is modeled after. So the maiden, the mother, and the crone basically, and that each of these part of the cycle are seen to have their own like archetype and like identity and like kind of like magical strengths or whatever, so dealing with maiden a lot of times, that is like the sexual, youthful, but also often paired kind of like you were talking about like the beast. And my experience was it was often paired with a form of like violence or like not, that was kind of part of it, is that you're seen as like the huntress is a very typical archetype regardless of which religion that you're talking about with these individuals. And then you have the mother, which is more fertility and everything, which is like basically like a very, it's a very strong like more creation type thing basically. Right. But it gets inverted because it's almost seen as just making more offspring for the same cycle as opposed to for yourself as a mother basically.
Right. You become a tool for them, like producing more for them, like
mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And then you have crone, which is essentially the older like wiser, kind of identity basically that's often associated with like, death and stuff like that. So that's like one thing that I would just say is like, that's kind of like what we see over and over essentially is like, is these different parts. And that, if you were someone like me that basically, you had these different stages essentially that you would go through in your programming and everything to where, everyone of a certain age goes through this stuff and then they move on to like the next thing basically. And it's also kind of, I feel like a level of like, almost like, it's like programming that like the survivor does have parts for to like enact throughout their life, because a lot of times that is part of the programming is you get calendars and dates and different things, not just for rituals that you're going to attend throughout the year, but also for, when these stages are supposed to take place basically in your life. And Right. You'll have, altars that will come out to fulfill that role essentially, and try and create those changes in the system moving forward essentially.
I see. So these black witches, they program your life from the beginning, and like you have the certain transition points of your like, at 7 you're going to do this, and at 14 you're going to do that, and at like 20, 21 you're going to do this, and like so, and then that latent programming will pop up when it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Like setting an alarm clock. Okay, at 1:30 you're gonna ring and I'm gonna wake up. Like it's the same thing. Like right. And
Yeah.
so they program a young child, and they and there's many other factions, but the Bene Gesserit are still programming all of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And you essentially have them as like referring to Dune again, yeah, is like you have them kind of like standing behind all of like the main like heads of state basically and stuff, that it's like ultimately it's what we see in our real life, is that, but is that everyone can tell that a lot of times that our leaders are puppets to higher interests basically, is regardless of what you consider those interests. It's like most people aren't like, okay, this person's like making all their own decisions like on a certain level. Even if they are, they're doing it in reaction to powers greater than them that they have to obey basically, to maintain the level of power that they have, even if it is a little more for show than it is for the reality basically. And that's I think that's what we see in general. And so that's one caveat I would say is I'm not saying that I'm really not saying that like Mothers of Darkness would be the highest part of like the NWO order basically, mainly because ultimately it is a very misogynistic, I don't know, belief system basically. And ultimately like they're like they worship the goddess on a lot of levels, but ultimately they want it to be something they conquer essentially. And in my experience, my personal experience, all of the black witches and stuff, they had very much control over a spiritual realm, a spiritual like power essentially, but we're all still ultimately slaves in their own right, you know what I mean? And yeah, and even for me, like yeah, like I got a lot of most of the occult training from other women and stuff like that, but most of like the programming that really determined like the direction of my life and stuff, like at least in my experience, all came from men essentially, but the women were there to you know train you in the way that they had been trained, and to kind of like pass forward this. And on a certain level I think that they feel that women in general are, they're used in higher degrees as channels and stuff like that, of this kind of stuff than men are, so they have a certain amount of respect, but ultimately it's still seen as just another form of power that the hierarchy, which I feel like is mainly male, is trying to, you know, subdue, and control and exploit essentially,
It's funny, like how the males in the Cybele cult, they like in order to become powerful in the cult, like the women, they chop off their genitalia and they dress as women, and they and then they become powerful and they can have power in the cult. And it's similar to like you're talking about how men are dominating the women's spaces. It's a conquering thing, and it's kind of like the transgender. Like I know it's off
there's a
topic,
lot of homosexuality in my experience too when it comes to like higher, or like I don't know how to describe it, like a lot of like psychopaths that I've known have been kind of pansexual, it's like they they engage in homosexual activity, they engage in you know heterosexual activity, bestiality, child rape, essentially all of the above this. And like, but that's part of like what probably makes them feel like, Crowley-esque, this, merging of, um, almost like there's no transgression possible basically. And like, and I don't know how to describe it, like the mind of a psychopath is completely different from majority of humanity's mindset, and they all have their preferences is what I would say, but I don't think any of them, the people that we're talking about, are truly just pedophiles, or just one identity. In my experience, it's like it's everything, and that could be the demonic type shit, who knows, you know what I mean? But it's like, yeah.
Yeah, you can't pigeonhole them into being one category like that. So okay, here I had some. Uh, so okay, so you were taught about the role of the mothers of darkness and their place in the hierarchy of world power. When did they induct you? And can you tell us about that ceremony?
Yeah. So I don't know if like the induction type stuff is like usually multiple, basically through like multiple ages, because it's almost seen as like, at least from my experience, like graduations, is that like you go through certain rituals, a certain amount of abuse, and if you're still surviving it, essentially, still able to do what ultimately the cult wants is be going through this stuff in your, cult life and still able to like maintain a persona that can operate in the world like a normal person, essentially. Like if you're basically, as a kid, it's like, are you surviving these different traumas, essentially, and able to um, are you able to jump through these hoops that they're putting in front of you? And that's, so in my experience, it's like they will set you on a path incredibly early. But it's like if you at some point are not able to perform, then they will shift you to, towards another one. So kind of like you know, me having or being told at least that I was going to have some place in the hierarchy in the future basically was really just because I was able to go through a certain amount of abuse and like survive and continue to have these like dissociative splits that were beneficial to them both in like a real life context, but also be able to have the dissociative splits that they felt could perform the like ritual occult type stuff, I don't know if that's like so
Yeah,
I
like
can
you
talk about like
graduated to like in Catholicism, like, oh, your first communion, and then you got like, oh, then now oh, now you can take the wafer or whatever, the Eucharist. And now, okay, now you do the next thing, and like, oh, then you get confirmed or whatever.
yeah.
And there's different levels. And each one has a ceremony, and each one like, so um, if you survive the cages in Arizona and that underground bunker or whatever,
Texas, but yeah.
Texas, right? Then you make it to the next level, and you're not one of the throwaway kids that they're going to
Yeah,
burn alive or feed to the dogs or whatever
exactly.
right. So each one of these stages is that like overseen by these mothers of darkness? Is that how you're?
And yeah, in my experience, 100% of the time, like every ritual that was supposed to like move me, be like graduation and like it's like each time they make you feel like you're becoming one of them, like you're like part of the club, basically.
Oh
It's
no.
always put as like something you should feel very honored about and very excited about, and that's part of grooming the parts that are going to take over eventually to feel 100%, like their identity is intertwined with the cult, and it's very normalized to be like, this isn't trauma, this is training, this is how I want to be, how I should be,
Right.
etc.
You're a
Like that.
fine racehorse as opposed to like whatever. You
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you can do dressage and like pick your feet up and like do the fancy dances, right? You're the fancy horse,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. So, very Bene Gesserit style within your own head to where they're very subconscious. They're like behind the scenes manipulating everything in the slave's front.
The way that the programming is connected to this hierarchy and the pride of being part of the hierarchy and being trained into being like, it's not just pain and torture. It's like, this is how it's made. Like, this is how it's done. And I have to be proud of this. Right. So that's
Yeah.
another way of keeping everything in line.
Yeah, 100%. Like that's where like it's similar to internally how, the Bene Gesserit uh operate in Dune basically is that they're not the power in front of things, but they're behind the scenes like making all the parts move. That's very much like what a survivor that has a cult, programming, they're going to usually have a whole half of their system that may have even more alters than the front half of their system really has basically. Like in my experience, like, you mentioned like the Philomena part, like you'll have this initial split from like the first ritual where they're inducting you essentially, that will be seen, that will have this identity as one of them, but ultimately they build splits off of that to where can have a dozen, 2 dozen, 100 different parts that are essentially all operating as this like dark occult hierarchy that is controlling the survivor's life and consciousness, and switching all that kind of stuff from behind the scenes basically. So that's that's kind of like what. Are you screen sharing that picture right now?
I can here 1 second.
No, you don't have to. I wasn't sure.
Now it is. Now everybody can see this first picture that you're looking at too.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so that's basically like was just like a journal illustration when I was like working through stuff basically, where it's there was two very distinct, I don't even want to say halves of my system, because like I was ultimately built with like four that were that I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go that much into programming. It's just going to be a bunch of nonsense. Maybe one day we can just go into programming.
It makes sense to us, but go ahead.
That.
Right. That's fine.
But in any case, it's like it's kind of like an hourglass configuration. It's usually isolated to your different hemispheres of your brain later on. But ultimately, it's like seen as like these core splits, because they're very very early on, where you're going to have, the part of you that deals with normal life, and you're going to have the part of you that deals with the cult side of life. And that part, that early split basically is kind of like what you're seeing that evolved, here is essentially it was like a couple, it was, it's like a dark queen or dark mother type personality, basically, that goes through different rituals throughout the year and is seeing like what you're kind of seeing, I guess, in the image is like myself, my front self looking in the mirror and just seeing myself like a reflection basically. But that it's like for the cult side, it's like a two-way mirror basically. So it's like the front part of the system can look into the back part of the system, but the back part of the system is always able to see everything, like a two-way mirror, everything that's going on in the front. And that's how they're able to like enact different timeline switches or all kinds of if you're getting out of line, not following the path that they want for you, or showing too much PTSD symptoms, etc. They're the ones that have control and access to all of the other parts that have been trained to take over in those instances, and to like, kind of nudge you in the direction that, you already have planned for you. So part of you is always aware of like the occult stuff, but it's not accessible usually to the slaves like front part of their mind throughout their lives essentially, until an eventual plan switch later, like much later on in their life, where that would be the intention, is that there would be like essentially the cult personality becoming the front system, and the front life being subsumed behind that, so that you could, fulfill your ultimate role, once you have like a very solid front persona, essentially, that, a very good cover in society and everything like that, then you can assume, your ultimate like hierarchy role. But
Does
and that's
that
just
take
what.
a free will choice, or by that point is the victim so trained into it that she doesn't have a free will choice? I mean, do they?
Personally, I feel like it is a free will choice, that you're it's that's the benefit, that's the beauty of dissociation, on a certain level, is because you do always have a core self that's preserved, that isn't, cult allied. On a certain level, it's like it will be, you're you're either going to make it to that point, essentially, and one of three things are going to happen. You would have either killed yourself through intentional or unintentional self-destruction, you know you will have gotten to a place where you're deprogramming, and you'll see these things, and be able to choose not to follow them, or you'll have essentially kind of been broken and given up, essentially, on a certain level, to where, you, that part of your system, through your, I don't know, it's kind of like how John Miller talks about like a psychopath being formed, essentially, is that you're constantly given choices to make in your life, where you can either be selfish and, psychopathic and self-serving and stuff like that, or you can choose to, make the harder decision, which is to say no to those temptations. So in my experience, like my belief, is that, if, you know, the many times that those temptations had come up for, that part of my system, that ultimately there was still much more of my system that was holding out, because, we did have a strong connection to our moral compass. But I feel like the ones that it is allowed to happen the way it's programmed, it's because on a certain level, even in their front life, they have, chosen to, make decisions that put them in a more selfish, psychopathic, self-serving mindset, to where it's not a big struggle, once it's the timing, has gone off in the programmed slave system to, to switch, basically, to for that inversion of the system to essentially happen. That's like what I feel like we see in Alice, you know what I mean? Is that she has basically, somewhat identified too much with materialism, etc. You know what I mean? To where that switch is allowed to happen, where she can then, rather than having qualms about giving her daughter up to, she's not amnesiac 100% of the time. She's conscious, that she's, allowing herself to make these decisions. For myself, I had what is, for I think a lot of people, a somewhat later, thing, because I was essentially, which it was basically like before my 36th birthday. Is that it was, so when I was 35, basically in that year was when my switch was supposed to happen, and I was supposed to have 2 kids at that point. That, when the switch happened, it would be like a continuation of the cycle, basically, and it was fucking hell. like having to face all of this, when all of it started coming up. But at the same time, I had done so much healing and so much deprogramming myself that I was able to recognize what was going on, and be able to, like, with all these cult parts, they're really just, like we said, split off of a very, very young, traumatized, cult aligned part. But ultimately, that child would have never wanted to be in that role if they had a choice, So it really comes down to just healing the cult parts the same way you heal any trauma part, which is just compassion and understanding, and I don't know. But in any case, for me, like it was a little bit later from like because my timeline was that I was going to be in the hunter tracker stuff we had talked about, that the NWO takeover would have happened in my 20s, basically. I wasn't given like a specific time, but around like 24, 25 was when that was supposed to occur, according to like the program they put in my system. But essentially, like I had, because they always have like backups because they don't know for sure anything is going to happen. With like my timeline, I had essentially been let go. So they didn't think I was going to be a Black mother, essentially, because I had a breakdown in my 20s where I don't know if I've talked about this on this show or in the past, but it was basically
a little bit about like alcoholism and
yeah.
the like acting out and your programming breaking down, like right.
Yeah, and not being able to like perform in the
Right.
ritual anymore, basically. So where I had been, set to be part of like this hierarchy, I was essentially, let go. They assumed that I was going to like self-destruct through alcoholism, essentially, and then not be a problem like so many slaves are, that like they use you until they can't anymore, and then it's like they a lot of times will want you to kind of off yourself or make yourself less credible, in a lot of different ways.
Like what happened to Mandy in Eyes Wide Shut. Like
Yeah.
Mandy was used up with drugs, like as opposed to alcohol, but she.
Yeah, and then as soon as she stepped out of line, to
Right.
say, dong from
Yeah.
from ultimate from what he was getting into, basically. As soon as she tried to escort him out, basically broke her programming, is like because she had felt some compassion, for him and wanted to save him, that immediately like mitigated, or kind of like canceled out any other stuff that she had, because now she's not obeying. And if
Right.
you're not bloodline to where they are going to try a lot to salvage you, then they're just going to get rid of you, essentially.
Right. They would be trying to salvage you because of your bloodline, right? Because they want your children, and they want that family tree hierarchy
Yeah.
of genetics.
And they're just elitist fucks that just feel like
Too,
there's a certain part of humanity that is more worthy of living than the other part of humanity. So that's kind of, it's like, not one of their own. They don't want to get rid of one of their own if they don't have to, Other people they don't give a fuck about, So it's just like, if you don't obey, then whatever. So so for me it was because I don't know if I talked much about the Habsburg unicorn stuff, but that essentially there was, because I hadn't killed myself like they thought I was going to, I got picked up for reprogramming, and then was given all this, stuff about 35, and that being like, being allowed to, being forced to attend the ritual in Paris basically was like my reinduction to the occult hierarchy. And then, that was the ultimate plan. It's like the hunter tracker stuff was still there in case that they were able to pull the trigger on the whole Black Awakening thing. But ultimately, at that point, it was just like, oh, like maybe this is someone who has enough programming intact that we can, maybe salvage her as like a future programmer and like hierarchy thing, like I had been intended initially, and especially because of these 3 girls that they seem to have somewhat, I don't know, that's what they instilled in us, was some hierarchy importance, basically. One of them was dead already, so it's like there was like a certain, I don't know, like
urgency to keep you because there's already one was gone, right?
Yeah, and it takes a shit like a fucking lifetime to put this amount of programming in people. So on a certain level,
Right.
if you have gotten to the point where you have gone through this much stuff, and they've already decided early on that your path is you know, that you're capable occult wise, or your path is like worthy or whatever, then it's like, you know,
I
then
mean, that,
it's
yeah,
like,
that dude like dressed up in that silly costume and got up on that white horse and like, you know, saved you when you when you were 6 or whatever, and all those rapes and all, you know, dressing up like Jesus and like all of, you know, burning all those children in front of you and all that stuff, it would go to waste.
yeah,
Oh, how could they? You know, all
I
that
know.
work that. So it makes sense they tried to salvage you because, I mean, you are valuable. You know,
There's
like
just
a
a lot of time
worm, like you're the
that,
butterfly as opposed to a worm. Like, you know, you've been created into this thing that can be wielded, this perfect tool, perfect slave for them. You know, and if you're not going to burn up in alcohol, of course they're going to try to use you for another thing, right?
yeah. Yeah. Well, and it was something that on a certain level, like my main handler Gates, like, you know, felt like he respected about me, you know, was like, you know, he was all about strength and strong, you know, and because I hadn't killed myself, it was proof that I was, you know, I was strong. You know, it's just, even
Man,
though I had been trying to heal at that point, you know, some, but I just didn't have any context for, you know, like what was going on in my life, basically.
right.
Um, but,
Man, he's like this is, you know, like he owns this racehorse, and like, oh look, it's still a winner, it can still win, you know, like
mhm.
that's so messed up, like Jesus.
Yeah. No,
And I,
exactly.
you know, and I looked up this Julius William Gates, and he, you know, his, I don't know if we talked about it on the show with you, but this guy, like, he was in charge of programming. Like, it says programming, you know, like, but not really. Like, it's some kind of like, you know, military training guy who trains specific special training for like special military, whatever. And it even kind of says it right there, you know, like this,
Yeah, did
he's
you read
the,
the interview that he gave? He pretty much like is like if you know what we know about him, you know what
right,
I mean? It's like he, you know, he was obsessed with training, you know, he's like it's like
right,
that's the whole thing, you know, it's like if like getting people to excel in training, you know, and to being able to like mold, you know, individuals and uniforms. That's
right.
the other thing that consistently comes up with him is fucking uniforms, and that was my experience too. Is he had a real pageantry, like kind of like, you know, weird obsession with like
Queer.
things being just so, you know. So
Yeah, he'd be good on that you know, queer show where they like do design queer eye for the straight guy. Like he'd be
I think when he was
like a
starting,
military eye for the Illuminati guy.
I think it said like he made like over 20 different uniform changes when he was sergeant major of the army, you know, just because it was another like weird like control, you know,
Yeah.
like it's just yeah. But in any
Yeah,
case, yeah.
just imagine
If you
it.
look him up, like it's very
And like the site, the military is full of all these people that are all like doing little weird changes to the uniforms and shit. Everybody's got to like obey the orders. Oh, now we're wearing a tutu for our costume. Okay, like, okay, whatever. Let's go shoot people now.
yeah.
Oh, it's so crazy. Like, oh man. Anyway,
Oh
like,
my god.
but really, like all of these psychopaths, all of them working, and they're all grinding their gears, and like the result is the military that we have today. And like, oh my god, like look at what they. Like I was joking around with Max about on the last show I did, and about how the new recruits are they're, you know, they're, the new recruit males are given breast implants, and they're, it's paid for by our taxes. Um, so it's really psycho. What, you
Yeah.
know, like it goes. That dude likes the uniforms, but these other dudes, oh, they like body morphing and like, you know, uh, transgender,
It's a sign of a lot of
transhumanism, and like
trauma that has been
right,
going on, you know, and it's and on a certain level that's in my opinion what much of the trans stuff is about, you know, I have so many male parts. If this trans shit had come out when I was like a teen or something, and that had been my intended path, it's very possible that I would have had,
Yeah.
the same, like, well, I definitely would have had the same confusion as like a lot of like, young kids, because I would have just been like, well, I do have male voice. Maybe I'm a man, you know what I mean? But it's like, that's where it's like, I kind of feel like a lot of, this is my personal opinion, is that a lot of trans people are in fact on the spectrum of DID, to
Right.
where because of life circumstances, they've been, you know, it's always
Right. It
existed
might not be like
to a very small
DD.
degree, but the degree that it has, it just feels like another cover, for people just acknowledging and dealing with their trauma in society and mental health things, admitting that like that's at the core. But I think that's true of a lot of things, even on a certain level, like I mean, most DID people get misdiagnosed like 5 different times before they get, diagnosed with a dissociative disorder, because it shares, the switching shares so many characteristics basically with like a lot of, mood
Right.
swings or like ADHD symptoms. A lot of these things, the depression, anxiety, all this stuff, shares similar symptoms with a lot of other mental health
Right.
issues, which to me also indicates that maybe a lot of mental health issues are due to, life, life
Trauma.
circumstances and trauma,
Yeah.
that we endure to varying degrees in our lives, basically. Um,
And those similarities help to keep it hidden from the the psychologist or psychiatrist. That
mhm.
like they'll never know, because all these alters are switching and doing all these performances that were programmed in by these mothers of darkness programmers, like in order, like if
Yeah, but also on like a everyday level, like I think that it's true of just like people that haven't gone actual mind control and programming, but just have gone, dissociation is a very normal response for kids, even if like all they went through was neglect or all they went through was some, anger or addiction in their parents, or psychological harm, and especially sexual trauma. But you don't necessarily, in my opinion, and in many, dissociative therapists' opinion, it's like parts form more naturally. So it's more common than not that people are on these kind of like spectrums, basically. They call it internal family systems now for like
hmm,
the more like mainstream version of it. But yeah, but then especially if you're dealing with intentional programming, yeah, it's like 100%. You're gonna have male parts, you're gonna have female parts, but there is gonna be more control. If they don't want you having, if you're in my sector of things where it was intentional mind control, intentional parts creation, you're not going to get the sex change operation unless that's what, that's not the route you're going to go down unless that's what they intend for you within
right.
the cult, so um
Yeah,
because
well, they
they
want
want
to
you to
keep
perform the
you
role.
for they want to make you have 2 children, so that
Yeah. Oh yeah.
they wanted you to be a breeder for the original programming, but
Yeah.
then the alcoholism and the breaking down. So then they're like, okay, you don't have to be a vet, surgeon, or whatever. You can be an artist. And then they is that so that did that happen at the 20 when they started to get you into
when
the
i was
new role?
when I was 17, basically, was
Okay.
when that, if you're talking about the artist veterinary surgeon, that's when that decision was made, basically, because I had always been very academically skilled. I all,
Right.
advanced and like got a test into schools and all that kind of crap. You know what I mean? But I was very depressed, and all the PTSD was showing to the point where I was becoming very apathetic about academics towards, when I was 17. So, but that was, the art thing was always something that was very encouraged, like by, Gates really liked it. My dad really liked it. It was very encouraged as like another, you know, positive aspect of like my achievement type front, basically, was how, it's like, I don't want to like sound arrogant, but ultimately, like artistically, I've always been like miles ahead of my peers, essentially. Like I'm a realist painter. Like my journals are not really a good whatchamacallit, like not really a good example of like
They're
what I
not a
do.
finished product. It's like a sketch,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like the stuff that I did is like more like, I don't even know if you can see it here. It's like I have like a couple, there's like a
Oh,
horse
yeah.
thing. These are just like stickers. Oh, that's a
Yeah, yeah.
digital one.
Oh,
These are just like
yeah.
images that I did, which you can probably barely see, but ultimately,
We did see some of the we did an episode
oh
with
yeah, on the
you.
art episode.
That's right.
Sorry.
We shared some of
Yeah.
your work, and like the Artemis pictures and the different, you were using some of those had your internal parts fighting
Hmm.
the demon of the
Yeah.
programming.
That was
Uh,
not technically proficient because that was a really old one,
that was
but
an
still
old one, right?
on
Right.
the, it was on the, it was on the path,
Well, you
of where
should be
that.
proud of that one because like they're really all of them are good, and that that is one of the things that that shine about you, whether you're like in programming mode or not. Like it's still like it is. You, you should be proud of that. You know what I mean? You shouldn't be
Like,
modest, right? So
yeah,
like, it's good that
I,
you have that, and that like also that is like inherent. It's not something that they can't like torture it into you.
yeah,
It's like a natural ability that is like just flowers out, instead of them, because they can torture left brain like responses into you, like, oh, this stimulus, oh, I respond like this, okay, oh, or like reptile brain type stuff. But really, art is a natural human uh, characteristic, like something that they can't like make you have it. Like you
yeah,
have to have it. They have to allow it to flourish out instead of, so that no doubt that is a
yeah. It was ultimately
redeeming
something,
quality.
yeah, and it's had mixed feelings to me, like how I felt about it always, just because it is very much, it was something that was very, very valued, by my abusers, by my handlers. It was something that
Yeah.
I was genuinely praised on, but also something that felt like I was, that much more of an asset, basically,
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, but ultimately they do love having, uh, surgeons and veterinary surgeons that are programmed because you have a lot of access to a lot of things, basically. But yeah, that was my path, was to go the art route, and then that was going to be my front life, basically, how I got respect in society, etc. So as like a cover, but also as, like we said, it's like another um, you know, pin on their lapel, another like jewel on the crown. That it's like, there's a certain level of respect or achievement there, basically. Um, but kind of like roundabout, because we were talking about the induction stuff. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
where I guess I could, just like um,
You
the
still
other
have this
images that
image
I
up. Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say the other images I sent. I know I talked about this on the Imagination podcast, but I don't think I talked about it here with you, basically. And there's one of, you're going to see like Black Mother kind of situation where it's like a bullheaded deity with columns. It should be kind of like a golden brown color.
This one.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. And those are the Black Mothers there, basically. Those are the mothers of darkness in that particular area. Um, and I'll just very briefly go over like what the situation was. Is that this was what I see as like my initial induction ceremony, like the whole reason I got the path that I did in the hierarchy, essentially, and was because I was able to perform, at a ritual for them the way they wanted. But I was like I don't know if I like the exact timeline because I was very young, but I was either like 2.5, 3, early 3 years old. It was basically right before I moved from Washington, D.C. to Texas, essentially. Um, so right around 3. And it was essentially being taken to like being picked up on the curb. My dad brought me out to a car with women in, and in the car the women were already in, not their heads veiled, black robes, and being taken by them, and it was a area that was in proximity to Capitol Hill because that's some of the things that I had remembered about it. Was seeing like the Lincoln Monument and then seeing like the Capitol building and stuff like that, and that it was essentially being taken through tunnels like underneath one of these like official buildings, basically, to like what to me feels like looking back on it, very much a recreation of like an ancient like temple space, basically, with large columns and everything being made of really big kind of like golden sandstone type brick material. And it was underground, but it was a massive room, like massive. And at one end of it, it had this statue, essentially like a bull-headed statue that was seated, kind of similar to the Lincoln Monument, actually. But that it was during that ritual that I was brought on stage in front of hundreds of people that were also black robed, but mixed gender and ages and stuff like that, by these women for like what was seen as like my, initial occult ceremony, essentially, where I was, like ritually like raped by a golden phallus at the altar at the base of the statue. And then like wrapped in these like linens, like a mummy, basically, to where just my head was out. And then I was like sat on a throne to the side and watched like as they essentially like I was being presented to this crowd of people, essentially, as like having this place of hierarchy. And then they sacrificed 3 little girls that were like my same age for me, because I don't know. It was both in my place, but then also like it's seen as a sacrifice to the goddess, to the magic, whatever you want to say. So it was these 3 girls being essentially like raped to death and then piled on this statue, and then everyone, after the rest of the ritual was over, everyone cleared out, and that's when I was brought to the other end of this massive room where there was like this stone sarcophagus, essentially, that I was seated on another little throne next to it while they got it ready, and it was filled with water. And this was like my first, I don't know how to describe it, like test or whatever, to where it was just determined whether or not I was going to be part of this whole group and whether or not I was going to be part of the hierarchy, being part of their sect, was ultimately on whether or not I could perform in an occult task, basically, which in this case was like a channeling type scenario. And that was just where I had been, it's like they poured some blood from the altar into the water, and then I was just repeatedly like dunked in the water, and then as soon as they, to the point of like losing consciousness, essentially, and then they would pull me out with these straps. That I think that's the other one that I sent that's kind of similar. They would fun. Yeah, they would raise me out of the water really rapidly, basically, and start asking me questions, rapid fire, basically. And the first few times I, did what any normal kid would do that had almost just drowned, where you'd like cry and freak out and all this stuff. And then if that was my reaction, they would immediately, just drop you back in the water and then repeat the same process over multiple times, to where there was a point at which, instead of, having this scared child mentality, I, I don't know, like, this is where things are weird. It's like, do we believe this occult shit? Do we not? I have these experiences, but on a certain level, sometimes I feel like it's just us tapping into our own potential and it not being outside stuff. Who fucking knows? But essentially, at some point, there was, uh, um, a switch that occurred, dissociative switch that happened, where I stopped being a scared for my life child, and like my eyes like just snapped open and I just looked at him with total hatred, basically, and but felt a lot of, I don't know how to describe it, a lot of like power or something like that. And that time they like raised me up, like I was able to answer some of their questions essentially, and then they take you out of the water, move you to the throne, wrap you in kind of like a warm blanket and continue to like, ask these channeled questions or whatever, so I, at that point, was performing the way they wanted me to. And if you pull up the image, one other time, or the one that was black and green.
Yeah.
So that's like what you're seeing with like the top right hand corner there. It was that altar, it was basically an altar that had been created that was seen as like the seat of my own system's occult power, and it was actually a ritual that was repeated many years for me, basically, where there would be a sacrifice prior, and then some of that blood would be put in a water basin, and I would be, the other acolytes, the two other, like, I would usually have a couple other people, two people, one on either side, basically, that would dunk my head in the water until I was like at the point of losing consciousness, and then would switch into this other consciousness, and they would seat me on a throne and ask me questions, basically. So it was kind of like a repeated thing that would, a repeated ritual that would happen that started when I was like 3 years old, basically. And that was kind of part of how I understood it as I got older, why, this whole half of the system felt like they were, this Mothers of Darkness affinity, is like that we were somehow, special or powerful in the same way that these other evil black robed witches were, and, so what if it requires sacrifice or whatever to get there, that it's still essentially something to be proud of. Like you feel very identified with it, essentially. And that's a lot of why I was, I continued to perform those roles in the hierarchy, basically, was because they still saw me as having these like occult attachments, still embodying this like archetype, still able to perform this role, I guess, of being able to like answer questions that they had, etc. And like I said, I don't even I ultimately don't know like where this shit comes from. I'm honest about that with people. It's like I'm not saying like there's some occult entity that I was channeling, or whether it's just, through dissociation that we just click into the collective consciousness, you know what I mean, or something where it's more just you're once you have this complete belief that you're playing this role, then, I don't know what to say,
Right.
with it, but I'm not saying that I believe it 100% either. You know what I mean? That, it's like the answers I could be giving them were bullshit, but they were at least correct enough, for them to see this whole repeated ritual shit as valuable, basically.
Yeah. It's weird that bathtubs are like people passing on in the bathtub, like the ritual victims in Hollywood and stuff. And like we'll see, like in Clockwork Orange, they put Alex's head in the bathtub when they were torturing him, and they were like smashing the side of the tub, and it was like whang, whang, and it was making this weird sound. I wonder if, and the Typhon order, Leviathan is like this beast of the dark and the deep and the wet and the ocean, right? And the Artemis is in the moon and the ocean and like all of
Yeah,
that.
moon and the ocean are like interconnected in my experience when it comes to at least the particular archetypes that I, came to understand, that it was like water magic and the moon was kind of like the whole,
Yeah.
at least for like me and what I had to perform, that was typically, and on a certain level, blood is kind of seen as water as well, and kind of interconnected essentially with that, which makes sense too, because you got moon and menstruation, there's like a lot of,
Yes.
you're going to have these kind of like interconnected, like occult relationships between different things when you're dealing with these archetypes.
Right. Yeah, the menstrual blood is the starfire. That's the red of the red and the white, the combination. So it's very interesting. So I think that maybe this deity, this ancient female deity, is related to the water, and that's how she takes hold of your body, or that's where her connection to your body is. That's why they do this water thing. So, I mean, I think because that's who they're connecting you to, is that moon goddess, feminine, ultimately, right? The Ishtar. I mean,
Yeah,
it was
I mean that was the
Hecate, right?
yeah, I think that was the path that was chosen for me, very
Yeah.
early. That's why this was, what I believe is the particular ritual I went through, and then why future rituals, continue to like reinforce these same things basically.
Right.
Because for me, most of the rituals, especially the ones that my handlers were involved with, all outside. He had a more druidic leaning and everything with his particular stuff. But every time I had um, a dark mother kind of ritual going on, it was always in these like underground, very kind of ancient Babylonian-ish, kind of looking places, basically, that they had these specific areas that's what happened, and it continued to happen in Texas, that I had, I had a lot of other programming going on, but in addition to this, stuff that was just around violence or around the sex trafficking, essentially. But in addition to it, there was also this, this branch of my training, branch of my system that was created that was 100% dedicated to like the occult side of things. And it was always women that were the ones that overtook that particular, line of programming and had very specific locations for it.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. Like, we had a gentleman on here talking about the how he's got certified psychics, and we were going through the list, and it was like 80 to 90% of them were women,
Mm-hmm.
and you talk to Arizona, like, well, you don't talk to, but you listen to Arizona Wilder there with her interview with David Icke all those years ago, and she talks about reptiles and stuff. She was also talking about like the psychic women that would be used in the rituals, and how they would have certain color hair, and these things that they were selected for. It all fits kind of. So anyway, this bathtub and the Typhon, even like Damien Eccles would like get a glass of water and put it out under the moon for his like magic rituals and stuff. Like, I mean, he would submerge the victims' bodies in water, and it was like right near Beltane, and it was on a full moon. In West Memphis there.
I think we all know that how shady that story is, and
right. Yeah. God. But I mean, it's like so evil
day, because he's so like obviously someone that got off on very heinous crimes,
Yeah, he loves it.
And is very
proud,
self-assured and proud. Exactly. Yeah. It's a typical sociopath like kind of thing. So it's so
maybe it's just an alter inside of him that's proud, and like a Philomela type thing that he has a status, like
once I don't. So this is where my understanding is, and John Wheeler talks about the moving into psychopaths. I do think a lot of them can potentially be DID at the start, but at a certain point, especially if it's happening for most of his life, it's the good part of him. That's what I see is what's going on with sociopaths and stuff, is like the good part of them is completely subsumed behind the alters, the parts of you that have been willing to be psychopaths, to the point where that's just what you are. There's no part of him that's fighting to be good, basically. You know what I mean?
But I mean, he proved himself by like doing that to those poor children.
Yeah, exactly.
That's his proof right there. He's graduated to the next level where they
by choice. By choice, because it's something that once you've learned you can get power with a certain thing, and you decide to do that. If it was an alter, then what would have happened is he would have performed that, and then when he wouldn't continue to, he would have turned himself in and like apologized. You know what I mean? He wouldn't have continued to like just try and get one over on the public and essentially like be very like being the poster child for like fucking satanic magic.
Dude,
being
he's writing books, being friends with Johnny Depp.
Not weird. I know we could go into all those connections.
Yeah, William Ramsey. Like, you should talk to William Ramsey. We gotta make that happen.
I think we're gonna have an interview here soon, so hopefully
that would be good. Yeah. So let's go back to this painting here, the green. This off in the woods, this white-haired, blindfolded figure. This is one of your altars.
Yeah. So basically, I don't think I mentioned that when I was going over the thing, that they would wrap me in a blanket basically after the submerging, and then throw a blindfold over, because this is like where things get weird, but it's also not weird, because many people have had out-of-body experiences, to where they feel like they've seen themselves in a situation like from a third-person perspective. And that was my understanding, because especially that first one had a very much out-of-body experiences, that when I was tapped into this part, my eyes would be completely rolled back and you wouldn't blink. So they would put this like kind of like a damp cloth over like your eyes, basically, maybe just to like keep them from drying out or something. Who the fuck knows? Or maybe. But that was part of it. The sage, spiritual guide, channel, whatever you want to call it, altar was always these rituals of being partially drowned, and then and then having like a blindfold on, and then being asked to answer questions, essentially. That they had. I mean, in this instance, this was like the Childermass ritual that happened to me many years, where it's at the end of December, and basically it was seen as like the holiday for them, where they would kind of like induct new NWO babies basically in this like trauma ritual, and they would essentially sacrifice, very similar to my induction thing, where they're like, in place of you, we're going to kill these 3 other children, essentially, that it was the same thing where in place of the child being sacrificed, a la, the Moloch kind of idea of that being part of the cult, you sacrifice your child, but they have now, in my experience in this reality, they have a lot of attachment to bloodline, basically. So they don't actually want to kill any of their kids because they see them as too valuable. So they bring in a proxy, essentially another child that gets, same age, etc. That is like the sacrifice.
Scapegoat.
Yeah, but the other infant is still part of the ritual. It's just not being killed, but it's still being thoroughly traumatized, basically.
Right.
It's like the beginning, I think, of a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of cult babies' life, especially if they are in bloodline families, essentially, that, that it's like the trauma starts in infancy, and they aren't being killed, but they are still being traumatized, essentially. And it was this innocent blood that was, put into that basin, like I talked about.
Right.
Just a little bit of it. It was always mostly water. I don't know why, like we said, the water thing was always big. And it was seen as like, this almost like this price that you paid for this knowledge that I would then give. And it was the people that were allowed to ask the questions of me were always the people that had their infants in the ceremony, basically. So it was like seen as this like, trade-off. It's like I'm going to commit my baby to this, and now I also get insight into various crap in my life that, in a psychopath's mind allows them to, get ahead in, who knows, business or with different rivalries, etc. Like information that they wanted and had just, paid a price with the innocent that they brought to get, essentially. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it also makes sense to as like the programming that they give the people that are giving a sacrifice. Oh yeah, it's good. You'll get to we'll get these benefits by giving up my baby. So there's got to be an excuse, like logically. Of course, I can't give up my baby.
Yeah.
I want to, do good in business, and I want whatever. So like, it makes sense that they would have like this excuse.
Well, and they feel like they're giving them their baby a place in the hierarchy that they wouldn't have otherwise. So it's for their own good,
Oh, yeah.
And who cares if they bring this like throwaway baby essentially in exchange, essentially.
Right.
But
They can
we're
have
dealing with people.
They can have another bacchanal and just, fornicate with some more and just have another baby, whatever. They're always having like these blood orgies anyway. Like, might as well.
Yeah, and I mean, in my experience, a lot of the babies came from Mexico because I was always in a border area. So
right.
it often wasn't many of the sacrifice victims, in my experience, no matter the age, were typically, it's not like they matched the same ethnic. It was mostly white people, basically, that were performing the ceremonies, but it was often, Mexican, in my experience, or maybe they were love children, these people that were the ones that were actually, considered the replacement baby, the throwaway, to them kind of thing, to where they could maintain their bloodline baby and not have to kill that, but then still get the, appease the gods, still get the benefit in the ritual, of what they were supposed to do, which is, sacrifice an innocent, basically, for this exchange of power. So.
Okay. So moving on, like, what is happening here in this lower portion of the right? This is a table with it's a stone altar, and there's a person with a basin at the corner catching.
Yeah. So that's the same ritual, basically. It's just that was the role that I performed prior to the sage, was like I've talked about in other interviews. In this one, that it was that was the main part of my occult side of my system, was basically that I was the one that was also at times performing the ritual itself, basically. So it was one altar that was there to perform the sacrifice, and then it was another altar that, so that basin basically is like a basin that was later, like the participants partook of that blood, basically. That's why there's two circles. There would be two babies, essentially, like the bloodline one and then the not, essentially. But it was just important, where the blood went, that it got on the official bloodline baby from the other one. And then some of that blood was what in a similar basin was like poured into the water for the second part of the ritual, where where the channeling kind of action would happen, basically.
So they would coat you with the blood before they dunked you in, and then they would dunk the blood in the water also.
Well, no, they would.
Oh, they would cut the baby.
They would put some of the blood. They would. Right. They would make sure that plenty of the innocent's blood got on the baby that was going to live, essentially. Right. But it always feels like very child logic, to where they're like, this will appease the gods, just need to get blood all over this baby and it counts, you know what I mean? But it's been like that throughout history, it doesn't make any much sense, but it's do. But no, it was.
Why can't they just drink wine like the Catholics do? Or why do they have to? Why does it got to be blood? Like, I mean, if they can transmute. Oh, instead of this baby, we're doing this baby. Well, why don't they have to? Instead of blood, why don't we just do grape juice?
Because that's where they see the whole. That's where they see the whole source of power. And the Christian Mass is the blood, was created by reptilians, early on in Christianity to be a mockery of the same thing that they do, to kind of, get everyone on board with it. But no, for me, it was always that it would be a basin of water that just some of the sacrifice blood would be poured into, essentially, like mixed with, basically. And then that's like what I'd be dunked in.
Cotton is like the blood would be caught in this little bowl, and that would get dunked in the water, and then you would be dunked.
Yeah. So there was like multiple. Yeah, this is like multiple rituals throughout my childhood. Basically, this is like the roles that I performed. Was.
So you have So this is. I'm assuming the front altar is on the green side of the mirror, and then your Philomela altar, let's say, with the black crown, is on the right side of the mirror. And she's wearing the same crown as the woman with the knife. So is this also what you performed later with the butchery aspect?
Yeah, so this
for
is
others?
Like how it's just how it was expressed in my system, and how they wanted it to be seen, is that, because you're part of the hierarchy, they really want you to identify with royalty, basically, and very much be, see yourself also as elite and above other people's. And it's a way of, dehumanizing your, who you've been trained, to hurt and everything. And that's, and like I had mentioned before, I don't know whether or not this podcast, I'm sorry, but like, this altar basically, like early on, like around the time that I started performing rituals, but as the training was finishing, it was with a female who was also in the Artemis kind of role as her archetype. That was the one that was training me to be violent, essentially, to perform these sacrifices. Because it's, it's really hard work programming wise to get a child to be able to perform this kind of stuff, to be able to hurt another kid, to kill an animal, to kill a person. You know what I mean? It's you have to put that child through a shit ton to get him to, be able to do that, to have dissociative splits like that. And for me, at the core of it, like, there were many times, even early on, that I can remember, 5, 6-year-old during the kennel training, that I did repeatedly, try and get out of this role and to fight back and to refuse, etc. But there was an instance where, it's that I can pinpoint as the time at which this role was solidified, basically, because it was a time where, um, you know, just randomly, and Gates was brought in for this part of the thing because my Black Mother trainer, the Artemis woman, had not been able to get me to perform like I was being trained to perform, as far as like being able to kill an animal, or then they start with animals and then to get you the part formed until you can work up to humans, basically. That essentially, they wanted me to kill a dog, and I didn't want to, obviously, because at that point I had been resisting still being able to do that myself. I still had very strong parts that were like not interested at all in performing this role, even though we had been trained repeatedly to be an occult victim. We hadn't been able to be trained to be an occult aggressor, basically. And, so put a knife in my hands, tell me to kill this dog, essentially. And I say no, and I, of course, don't want to do it, basically. And they proceeded to set the dog on fire. And it was running around screaming, essentially, until it stopped, and then was still alive. And then she walked me over to the almost passed away dog and essentially put the knife back in my hand and was like, kill the dog. And at that point, it's an act of mercy because this animal is in intense suffering. And I'm really sorry, because I'm just realizing this is probably hitting home for you with your life circumstances.
Right. It's okay. No, I need to hear it. I'm also thinking about Full Metal Jacket, the end of Full Metal Jacket, with the woman, the young woman with the rifle. Like, she gets blasted by the machine gun, and then at the end, Joker kills her with compassion. Like, he has compassion for her suffering, and then
well, and that's basically the process I had to go through with my program, is because I hadn't been able to form the altars they want that could perform these kind of ceremonies, essentially. That they put me in a situation where it was very up close and personal how much worse it could be if like the kill wasn't fast and clean and quick. You know what I mean? Like that essentially
it's a mercy.
At that point, they created an altar. They were able to solidify an altar, basically, in me that was able to, in every ritual, go through the same set of equations to where my real self wasn't able to fight back, basically, to where basically you've been convinced that it's inevitable. If they've decided that this is going to be the victim for the ritual, it's inevitable that death is going to happen. Do you want to do it quickly and compassionately, or do you want to essentially, or do you want to refuse, and then they're going to make sure it's way worse for the victim, and then you're still going to have to do it anyway? It's like it puts you in, this is me being 5 years old going through this, to where it's like you have these very early splits to where it's like you have an altar that's convinced that there's no way out, and that somehow what you're doing is a mercy, basically, and that it can be way worse for the victim if you don't perform the way you're supposed to.
That's why Alice at the end, when she's distracting Bill and they're stealing Helena, she says, I think we should be grateful that we survived our adventures, right?
Yeah.
Because she's convinced inside.
Gratitude that you've been allowed to live.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So this is how they use your compassion against you to make you kill. And like you said, it's very it's my life, especially right now, the dog thing. Like I lost my dog Echo, and people that know me, they know he's like a very big part of me, and it was like a mercy thing, and like it had to be done, and like had to be quick and painless, and it's so anyway, that's it is like I'm trying to trying to find, oh yeah, we'll talk about the movie. It's just like Full Metal Jacket, right? But maybe the listeners could tell a little bit. But you know, it anyway. So they had to train you with animals so that you can work up to the humans.
Yeah.
And so it starts with the compassion. They get you with that, and then they make it worse and worse. Did the so the they were training you this way up until you were 17, and then I mean they had you performing like the butcher stuff prior to that, and they were like planning for your um, cutting up animals in regular life, being a surgeon, as your front personality too, right?
Yeah. I was very dissociated from a young age, and this is like the intention is that these altars that we're talking about, the cult altars, are the most dehumanized of any of the altars that you'll experience. They almost get to the point where they don't, they're not very connected with their humanity, with themselves being human, or with, it's like you see yourself at that point as like not being able to have a will of that altar, as being able to have a will of your own, and you feel more like a tool than you do like someone that has individual thought and everything. But equally, you're trained to then look at the victims is like you almost don't see the life, you don't see the humanity. It's like it's a very hyper rational kind of almost you just look at everything as like equations and duty or not duty and this kind of stuff, but that's what you need ultimately, like for many survivors who've gone for this, like the whole cult half of your system is incredibly dissociated from your front identity to where they don't even really like see, like that picture actually she was experiencing seeing my normal self with both seeing me as very weak, and very emotional and just like not, not capable in a lot of ways. But on a certain level, she was also incredibly jealous because like that part of me didn't have, all this responsibility or all this, requirement to be all of these like horrible things. It was seen as a much more free existence, and that's what I think in
that's
program.
the longing on the right side. She's longing to be on that side of the mirror. And
yeah, but because she can't be, she just has to be very happy and very grateful in her role as being, somewhat high up in the occult. That's what you end up identifying with is your role versus
her
your
crown.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So how old do you think that the order, these Bene Gesserit witches, how old do you think this dark occult, feminine Mothers of Darkness order has been around? Do you have any idea? Do you speculate on that?
No, I mean, it seems like, because to me, it was always taught as like a continuation of the same cycle, that it's like even if they hadn't existed in the same existence, in the past like couple hundred years, it's like before that, there was something else that filled that role in society. And it was almost seen as like this, like, chain of the same thing that has
to the beginning, like the old religion, right?
Yeah, this almost all the way back to creation. The idea of Lilith and all this stuff. Is that this is always this they're mothers of darkness, because that is like the archetype is a mother violent to where it's like almost an anti-child kind of mentality. So you have all this potential for creation, but you're able to also have it's like the power of life and death essentially. And that's like so yeah, I would say ancient, but this particular, iteration of Mothers of Darkness, like that we have in the world today, I would speculate, you know, uh, maybe a few hundred years, like this, but I mean, there was something else I think that filled that role in society before that, or so that I don't really know a ton, I know that.
I'll bet you with the bloodlines, it goes back longer than a couple hundred.
Yeah.
If they pay attention to bloodlines like that, and if they make people breed, like like we saw in Eyes Wide Shut, like the breeding programs of, like you were, like Kathy O'Brien and many others were, I guess, sold into the cult from like normal life, but you had a psychopathic dad, but still, like you weren't bloodline, so, but I think the bloodline stuff, like if you look at Tuesday Weld and her significance, she was high up in the in I guess, like, I mean, she was considered one of like a black magician, like a high goddess, like, but she had the bloodlines of the Weld family, and that's the Boston Brahmins, and then that goes back to England, and they are, her family were like Lord Mayor of London, and like were connected with royalty and shit. So like it's been, her family line has been connected to the actual royalty and stuff. And then she was just placed in Hollywood, and they were like going to make a Marilyn Monroe out of her. And then she was like, meh, I'm just going to do the witch thing. And then she would have these like two white wolves that she brought everywhere with her, and she would like dress all weird and like act all weird. And everybody put her up on a pedestal, even though she didn't do anything. She only made like a few movies. But like because of her hierarchy, like her place in it, and her bloodline. So I think that, for my speculation, if we're speculating together, I would say that if they pay attention to bloodline, I think that goes probably pretty far back,
Yeah.
of these, but so anyway, so that, but we're speculating here. I'm not part of it, and you've had a sidereal connection to them, and you are grateful that you're still alive.
Yeah.
Like, just like Alice,
And ultimately, I mean, I've never speculated really or gone into my genealogy at all to know whether or not
good point.
that is something that
Maybe.
like that's been, both, my mom was Swedish and Great Britain, was her past essentially. And I still don't know whether or not she was chosen for my dad, basically, because, their whole relationship.
Because he signed their book, and she was given to him as a gift. Like,
it's very possible, or because they knew that he was going to have a kid, that he was selling in, that maybe they wanted it to have a certain bloodline. That is pure speculation, you know what I mean, on my part. But even
that
on my
makes
dad,
sense. I mean, the Habsburgs are some from England, the unicorns thing, that relates to the British. I mean, you might want to look at that.
It doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter, like, here or there.
That's true.
It could even be through Gates. Ultimately, like I saw it, it could be even through Gates, my main handler's bloodline, that I might have gotten that connection,
Right.
It's very possible, I've never done, that's where this is speculation. I've never gone into into Gates genealogy. I've never gone into my own genealogy, really. I mean, and even, my dad's side, to be honest, like, they were Mexican, but they were all like blue eyed, and we know how many fucking Nazis immigrated to to Central and South America and shit like that, and his dad was a total psychopath, too. So who even, like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's possible that there was bloodline connections there, and it's possible that I got none, and it was just through Gates that I was allowed this title, because that was my understanding when it came to the like me being given position, in the hierarchy, not just in the occult, but in like the NWO post Black Awakening type stuff, was that, they wanted trained slaves in these positions, basically. And who knows if they had enough, they were able to generate enough bloodline ones. It might have been that I was just good enough, and had graduated enough through these different things that I was considered worthy to hold this role, because it was this occult role that we have was very much intertwined. That cult half of my system was both this, but then also just the very, like, just mundane political diplomatic type role that they had kind of assigned, that was a hierarchy, royalty type role in the post Black Awakening world, where, I had been essentially introduced in like my preteens, basically, like around like 11 or 12, to my proposed, the guy who was bloodline, that I would be his quote unquote queen. Essentially, he was several years older than me, about a decade, and that there would be a small territory that we would, like, I would be queen and he would be king of these, like, this, that they would basically be breaking down the U.S. and I guess the whole world, into these, smaller and smaller territories that had the NWO heads of them. And that was part of the role, of that, queen type persona of that system. There was also a, training there, basically, to be like the right hand woman of someone that would be in charge of these territories post-apocalypse, basically, when the psychopaths were in charge, and it's almost identical in mindset and archetypal role, that you're seen as just being able to be very warlike, very military minded, very, blunt, just seeing everything as far as very rational, as far as equations and stuff like that. And that essentially you would be, yes, breeding the kids for that individual, essentially, and helping to find his victims, etc. But that you would also be helping to reinforce the NWO, political system, totalitarian control, helping to enact all that stuff over, over all of the people that had survived it, essentially.
The ones that aren't running away from the reservation and weren't hunter tracked down and knifed in the throat while they were sleeping by cute young girls who have like, oh, I have my ankles busted, like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
What were you saying? Go ahead.
I was like, and to be honest, like, my understanding was that they cared more about the future generations, because it's kind of the whole orphan train idea that, like, if you get rid of most of the adults when this transition happens, you can kind of indoctrinate the younger generation into seeing this as normal and being complicit, in this new version of the world for them, which is, just total outright totalitarianism, basically, where it's just not even, we do have that to a degree nowadays, but it's still hidden on a certain level to where people think they have a decent amount of freedom. But in that world, they wanted to just be able to be the psychopaths they wanted blatantly without having to hide any of it. They'd just be, they would just be the rulers, and everyone else is the, is the slaves. It's kind of like what we see in China, and kind of seems like one of the test populations for this kind of idea, basically.
Yeah, the feudalism is like a new, right. And then, like, the way that they want to bring out the satanic and have it be totally normalized, like we see that with circumcision, the giving up of your child at the sacrifice of this pain and sexual torture, and it's totally normal. It's routine. and that's how they want to guide all of the things of their satanic, like the torturing of babies is okay, that's good, and then they also like inject them with the poisons and do all the other things, and so okay, that's normal now, and what's next? Like, okay, well, let's normalize killing off our the even killing our babies, and then like, oh, we need to have less humans, that's normalized too, and then what else they're normalizing, like
Adult euthanasia too, like
yes, made, yeah, good one, yeah, so like this, and so like this satanic signal is becoming like the overarching like song of society, and they didn't even have to have the Black Awakening yet. They didn't even need to scare us. Like,
and ultimately that's what I always talk about with like the villain programming that you see nowadays is it's basically what we see in like Harley Quinn and all these different Joker and all these different archetypes, like where it's basically an externalization of that same programming I went through basically for all of society, to where it's, it used to be the bad guy always lost, and there was this hero's journey that you would go on with like the good guy, and morality would ultimately win. But over the past decade at least, we've seen more and more in media the villain being presented as the hero, and it's almost like presented as like, well, it's like an equal but opposite path that you is very viable, for you to take in your life if you're a kid, to be, I could be a really good guy or a really bad guy, but as long as I have like a certain level of like achievement, then it's equally okay. There's
right,
no morality involved. It's just like, well, I'm a piece of shit, but it's justified. Therefore, it's okay. It's cool. Like I went through this amount of trauma. Therefore, I am allowed to now be, the Joker or Harley Quinn or whatever, because I'm just expressing the nihilistic version view of the world, which is equal to a natural law view of the world, which is obviously not the case. But that has been the programming media, and a lot of kids media especially, where more and more movies are about the villain or about the
right.
villains.
Wicked. That whole Wicked thing is new. Like that was from the perspective of the Bad Witch. That
Yeah,
movie
I
Wicked.
haven't
Like,
seen I haven't seen the musical. I read the books. I haven't seen the musical or
you read the
the
books.
book.
Was it triggering?
Oh yeah, there's like bestiality and all kinds of
Oh.
weird shit in there. That's true.
Oh, man.
I don't know what the movie. I haven't seen the movie. I haven't seen
Yeah.
But to me, it's like obvious certain satanic programming stuff. But it's like,
Right.
I mean, even Wreck It Ralph. Like I started watching that the other day with my son. And I was like, nope, turn
Never
this
heard
off.
of that. No. But
You
yes, so
haven't.
they invert the morality. The
Yeah, it's
hero
all
is
about
inverted.
villains and
Right.
being compassionate towards the villains and being like, well, they get a pass because they had such a hard life. They can
Right.
be horrible to everyone else, and
Right. Just
it's
like
cool.
Crowley. Just he could be the mega Therion. He could be the great beast, and then like, look, I am the 666 guy, like,
Yeah,
ooh, look at me. I killed this many babies, and everybody's like, ooh,
yeah.
um that whole thing, like they even the Beatles put Crowley up on like a
I'm listening.
pedestal.
I'm trying to find a phone charger. Sorry,
Oh, that's fine.
but I can hear you.
Yeah, that's fine. Like the idea of like to be the great, to be great in a hero or to be great in a villain, having it be equal, then that erases the morality, and you can just choose. Oh, if you like to be evil, it's okay. We got a place for you, kid. Like, just like Clockwork Orange, like Alex was fully psychopathic, and it was recognized by the cult, and he got hired, and now at the end he's like hired in, part of the working class, of the elite, um, and so that's training all of us so that when we get older, we can choose, oh, there is no morality. We don't need to worry about natural law. And then, the regular people can be inducted into the evil system now that the evil is externalized into the world, and we have the evil is the way of the world. Then even normal people can be part of the cult too. Like, just sign up to
Yeah.
the Satanism and the immorality. And yeah, so like Disney is programming that. Like, we see, I'm sorry I keep going back to Kubrick, but I've been watching all these movies together and like these Fidelio experiments, and like they sing at the end of Full Metal Jacket, they're singing Mickey, and that's like the beginning of the programming was the Disney.
Mm-hmm.
And like the Mickey Mouse Club is being part of the club. You get older and you be part of the Demolay Society, and you get older, you be part of the Masons. You're in this club, and you got your Boy Scouts, and you got your whatever. You take it away from mom, and you go to this weird place where they try to touch on you in weird place, it's weird how the society is like, how they're doing that. But that's how it's normalized to take away from the mother and to like chop the tip of the penis off, and like, oh, now we put them all in the same room together with the same age, and they all have to compete with each other, and like it makes it more of a like predatory mind, and so like we've gotten this far in society, and now we're at like this peak evil, I think. I mean, like just maybe a couple of years ago in Ireland, they legalized abortion, and people were in the streets crying, yay, oh wait. They should be crying the other way, like, oh no. Like, what the hell, the
Have you
hell.
ever seen abortion, the testimonies of abortion survivors?
Oh man.
And that's like just like one thing where it's like they can they they can physically voice the fact that it's like great for someone to have agency over their body to take away my, you know what I mean, that it's like
Right.
that they're basically, it's like, so why doesn't this life have a right to agency, but the adult does, but it is very much like stair stepping society down that path of all being part of the cult of Moloch, kind of shit, like where it's like they can all be in the position of willing to, dehumanize essentially their
My
children.
body, my choice.
Mm.
It's children. What? That's a clump of cells.
Yeah, which to be honest, like I was completely like I know the other side 100% because I, especially in college and stuff like that, I had that mindset, that it's like you don't even, it's what's encouraging. I can recognize, like it was a very satanic mindset that was being a very psychopathic mindset that's being encouraged to just dehumanize, just no consequences and just dehumanize, a living being, and yeah, I recognize that we've got issues of um, rape and incest and all kinds of like horrible things that yes, like um, it it would be convenient, I guess, to get rid of that child. But what you end up doing is compounding traumas on the victim, essentially, because now they've also, that's one other thing people often talk about is like how, people that have gone through it, some of them, yeah, don't think twice about it. But many, many people do, especially as they get older and can look back on it and be like, I really could have, if I wasn't pressured, I really could have made a different decision. Or if I hadn't been, convinced of, whatever, that there would have been a different possibility as far as, adoption or whatever else. Because there's no, there's like, they're horrible crimes, obviously, but at the same time, the baby that's being killed wasn't responsible for that crime.
Right.
And ultimately the person that went, the mother that went through that, is going to also have this additional thing that they're going to have to process, essentially, you
Two
know.
wrongs don't make a right, and like,
Yeah, and a lot of people feel guilt and depression and stuff like that after it, and it's like,
yeah,
so you have it from the initial instance of sexual assault, but then you're also going to have this other part that you have to deal with, you know,
right.
is, you know, so
And then you
it's not.
compartmentalize that and you say, I'm proud of that. And you wear a t-shirt that says, I had 10 abortions. I'm a proud feminist. And like, it becomes your identity, like this more of the satanic society, like
And I would argue the
externalized.
people that are that extreme are externalizing the fact that they probably are a cluster B personality, you know, a woman that has some mental damage, basically, if
Right.
you can be proud of these things, you know. So,
Right.
but yeah.
So, okay, we got one more painting, and there's also, I wanted to, but before we go there, we're kind of talking about how the Black Awakening, we kind of mentioned it
Yeah.
a couple times. And like I mean, it's a new year, but this last year was like, holy crap. Like, what?
Chaos is ramping up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they're shooting at presidential candidates. And then,
But it's
like,
funny because, like,
2 hours later, it's like they're talking about something else. Go ahead.
and everyone's picking him out as MK, though. That's why it's funny. It's almost funny, though, that they really are trying to pull the trigger on this Black Awakening shit and amping up the chaos and stuff. But the psyops are becoming more and more, like, noticeable to people,
Obvious.
obvious to people.
Mhm.
Exactly, you know. So, I'm
It's
like,
not as easy as they thought,
in
right?
in my experience, they are, from what I'm training was, they are decades behind their timeline where they thought they were going to be. And I am confident that despite them increasing the amount of trauma that they're making society go through, that society is like moving forward equally to fight that programming,
Right.
basically, because more and more people are not just giving in, but noticing, you know, noticing that suddenly every movie and every fucking, like, music concert is like a programming event or a ritual event, or, you know, or that all of these, you know, really mainstream large events that are happening, with lone gunman shooters, all this stuff that, you know, you can literally trace all of their connections back to themselves probably being a programmed, you know, to do those things, you know, and having some sort of like MK Ultra style, you know, occult style, organized crime, you know, connections, basically, that show that it's the same, you know, them doing the same thing over and over with people like me that are have front lives, but ultimately have gone through all of this shit in their past to where they've been able to have these altars created that are able to be triggered and then do these, you know, do these events for them, or at least be there to be the fall guy. And then they have, you know, actual psychopaths performing the real, you know, the real ops, essentially. Um, it's like you see it over and over, you know, even with the fires and everything right now. It's like it's like obvious, like, insurance getting canceled like a week before.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
literally, if it was like a person that like bought fire insurance on their business a week before it burnt down, like, everyone would be fucking looking at them like, really, bro? We all know that you fucking set your business on fire.
Right.
It's the same thing with this shit. It's like, yeah, we're just gonna cancel everyone's fire policy like a week before everyone's house burns down. Like, no, we didn't know it was gonna happen. It's just coincidence. You know, it's like, dude, how stupid do you think we are? But at a certain level, it's because we're dealing with psychopaths and like they enjoy flaunting it. And this is the externalization. They want, at a certain point, they're trying to pull the trigger and they're trying to do it faster than they think people are noticing, but it's not the case, you know. So I am still very confident that, even with a number of people that I've seen that have passed like me, that have been able to wake up and start healing the parts of them that were able to do this Black Awakening shit, that essentially, like, those parts, as big and scary as they seem, as being like, oh, like, you know, big, bad, scary, like, can, you know, special forces trained, you know, like, sneak around and kill everyone and all this, take out people in position of power, et cetera, et cetera. Those parts are all ultimately traumatized children that were convinced of a lot of fucking lies, basically. And just like this image, you know, they're all still, even in the front people, that haven't had their parts activated, they're able to see what's going on in the world, often, they're operating from the subconscious, waiting for their triggers. But what I feel like more and more of them are seeing is that all the lies they were told, that they wouldn't be able to heal, or if people knew what they did and what they were part of, that there wouldn't be any compassion extended to them. So they might as well side with the bad guys because that's who they're part of. Ultimately, what I think is happening in society is that more and more people are waking up to their trauma, and those child parts that would be performing this Black awakening stuff are seeing more and more this healing in society to where, oh, like maybe I don't have to be the assassin. Maybe I can just like share with my front self, and then, the world, what's going on, and get some level of like compassion. And that to me is like something that is all I think is also happening, like,
Yeah. That's great. That's the healing of the nation right there. And like with all of that program, all of those hours of torture, all of those sacrificed babies and children that had to scare the living daylights out of you, like it just to traumatize you into believing you're helpless and that you can't have any choice of your own. You do have a choice of your own, and you're doing that, and like their free will is like God gave you free will, and that can't be taken away. And that's like
yeah.
the one beautiful thing. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's cheesy to say, but it's 100% true that like love is, and compassion is the antidote basically to, you can put years and years and years of work into programming someone, but there's always this like part of their nature, as long as they haven't fully, given that up and become a sociopath or psychopath, if they're still GID, is they always have a part of themselves that that at the core, that kid that was able to be convinced to be cult allied never wanted to be in that situation, would have always preferred to have love and companionship and parents that, just took care of them and stuff like that. So it's like when they see these opportunities, ultimately, like it's like being given those decision over and over again, to where it's like the more love and understanding is put out there, which as a survivor, I just keep seeing this increase in that area, to where society is reacting with like love and compassion to what we went through, and not how our abusers told us what was going to happen, is that they were just going to throw us in jail and just, throw away the key and just shame us and guilt us and everything for things that we were forced to do as children, essentially,
crazy.
that it's like, yeah, those child parts are always interested in, if they had the choice between performing in horrible rituals or just going home and sleeping in a cozy bed, it would always be the cozy bed,
Right.
The reason they've been convinced of this is because the cult ones is because they've been convinced that that's not possible,
Right.
something that doesn't exist, etc. So the more we see it exist, the less power the programming really has internally, as well as like how it expresses in society externally.
That's why they always go to cross the wires of like, they do the torture, and then they like love on you and like, oh, we love
Mm-hmm.
you,
Yeah,
so
the
that,
trauma bonding. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that way, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It all makes sense. And we see it in the world today, like we were talking about with Max Lowen in the last episode. Um, it's how they're pushing it in the world. And we learn about that from Mark Passio, like the mini me Satanism and stuff. Like that's the whole, they're externalizing into the world. And this Black awakening is like supposed to be like the ripping of the band-aid of like, okay, here we go. We're exposed now. You
Mm-hmm.
all love us, don't you? Like, just like old times, right? Moloch, come on, guys, Uh, but anyway, so okay, we're um,
I probably have time
this.
for like one more question.
I was gonna
Or
say, like, we got one. This I don't know if you have enough time to like talk about this image here.
I can just briefly go over it, mainly because it's something that like it just illustrates like what the internal like the internal cult system looks like for me.
Okay.
So, because it was based off of royalty and hierarchy and stuff, it was based off of like a, dark castle tower, basically. That's where those parts lived, essentially. And that wall kind of represented the border between the green half of the system, the normal conscious part of me, and then the half of the system that was more that was 100% cult allied, basically. And that's part of like how the programming was reinforced internally too, is that's what you're seeing on the other side is the hallway, which is very similar to how the bunker torture rooms looked in reality, but it was also an internalized location where it was almost like jail cells for all of these different like torture parts and altars and stuff like that had essentially were there to be programs enacted, brought out if you were like straying from how you're supposed to behave, give you flashbacks, emotional flashbacks, body memories, torture memories, different just different feelings, identities about yourself, of hopelessness, of, not wanting to fight back, etc. And that's what's below there is like, both a torture type room that I had actually been in, but was also created to like internalize in my system as like the dungeon, essentially, at below ground level for this tower, where if you stepped out of line in your front life or in your cult life, if you weren't behaving the way you were supposed to, that you would have parts in you that were seen as these torturers, that were seen as all overseen by this black queen, black mother type personality, that would be pulled out, brought into this internal room where you could be tortured or reprogrammed or whatever, basically as like punishment for not behaving the way that your abusers wanted you to. So that's pretty much what you're seeing there, is like most ritual abuse survivors, a lot of DIDers in general, but especially ritual abuse survivors will have incredibly complex inner worlds, that are like, that almost feel like physical locations, but it's all in your mind, and it's all been somewhat crafted and guided by your programmers to be arranged and look like the way they want. That's kind of where media comes in, like for past survivors, like Wizard of Oz type stuff, they have different altars based off of that kind of stuff. For me, it was very fantasy-esque. Like we talked about my abuser, he really liked all that shit, and it's very druidic and very into knights and castles and all that kind of crap. So mine was very like fantasy oriented, essentially.
So they helped to build this in your mind. They designed it.
Yeah, they don't want and use like media examples, basically. This is where movies and books and stuff like that come in, but it's mainly movies, not necessarily books as much, because they want to be able to physically know like what they're implanting in you. That's part of the control they have over you, is to understand exactly the way your internal world works. They don't want to leave it up to your imagination.
Capturing your imagination.
Yeah,
like exactly. Disney captures your imagination.
Exactly. So for me, it was like, early animated, like Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Last Unicorn,
and the Last Unicorn, man, with
Labyrinth.
Tom Cruise, with Dong Bruce.
No, you're thinking of Legend.
Legend, right? Yeah,
but that is also another one that was part of it. Legend,
probably
Labyrinth. Yeah. All of these. I'm actually going to have a conversation at some point with Psyop Cinema guys just about kids movies in the 80s, because for me, especially, it very much factored in all of this stuff, basically about, that this was all the imagery that was fed to me for me to then base my internal world and parts and alters off of, the archetype idea all over again, but they're using media representations so that, your alters perform certain roles, have certain belief systems, and embody certain archetypes within your system, to manage that, system of control, basically.
Right. So it wasn't exactly designed. Your imagination put it together, but they gave you the tools they gave you all of the imagery. And even with Labyrinth, like some of the stuff is like very specific what's happening. Like
Yeah.
when she's going down and those little things like flip around the arrows, and those type of stuff are very easily used to like suggest into the mind of
Yeah.
the victim, like, oh, you
After
get
you're
lost in this thing, that your arrows get flipped around, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
After like torture and electroshock and shit like that, sometimes it was less left up to my own imagination and most often left up to going through this stuff and then being, read programming scripts or shown images from this kind of stuff to where they're literally building a part of your system. They know exactly the parts and they are assigning them the different roles, basically. Even like I had mentioned before, the unicorn thing was very much like what had been programmed to be like my opiate or my self-soother, basically, type of thing, that it's like they wanted to have control not over of like what I was afraid of, but also what I loved or felt attached to or got peace from, and for me that was the unicorn basically was. So it's like after a torture there was a time where I was allowed to be with a fake unicorn, like a white horse with like a horn fucking pasted to his head, in this cell, like appeared, and I was able to like, cuddle with it and lay with it and stuff, very young. So that became, I showed on Emma's podcast the image of my dad when I was an infant, and already there was unicorns all over the house, basically. Like, no reason for a grown man to fucking collect unicorn shit. But it was put there purposely, basically, so that I would already be associating these, this innocence, this beauty, etc. So in place of, turning to Jesus or God or something like that, for me or my mom, which I didn't have around, for me it was this unicorn. So it was kept, throughout my life as something I both identified with, but then also got, some peace from, basically. But it was totally programmed. It wasn't natural from my own imagination. It was always what was intended to play that role in my system.
Wow. And much like we know, like from the Fritz Springmeier books, and we learn about how Disney movies are built, and we know Fantasia was like built to be played during the torture, and like it's just music so that the kid can hear the words of the programmer telling them. I mean,
I'm seeing a little mute thing on my end. I don't know if
oh,
you're muted.
am I? No, I'm good.
Okay,
I'm
cool. It's
making
weird.
noise on.
I think it's just on the screen share image then.
Oh
So
yeah. I mute the screen
just bring
share
them up.
because if I do that because if I play video, like video has to have audio play through. But if I'm talking, I'm on both screens, so it would be double, and it would be like wah 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 wah, and it gets all messed up. So I have to mute one of
Just
them.
making
So.
sure.
Yeah, no, I'm thankful that because sometimes I mess up, like I did earlier in the episode, like
That's the only reason I brought it.
right, yeah, but I'm still kind of a novice, and I don't have a team helping me, like, but anyway, like, but then like you can trust me because I make these mistakes, like I'm a real person. But yeah, so this getting back to this, I know we have a time thing where this is your internal tower of power, I guess. And below that are these cells which contain altars that will bring up trauma memories and abreactions in your body to whip you back into shape when you are going out of line. And then even and below is a torture. It almost looks like a circumstraint, I mean, like a board that you tied down to. And is that dark figure? Is that a person over the board?
Yeah, it's like the what would be like the torture essentially.
Right, right. Yeah, the
Um,
moil. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. So, and there's like chains hanging, and you know, and there's a lot of red, looks like blood spilled. Right. So these are internal. So they do
places I
the.
saw in real life,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
not the
I was
one
gonna
on the
say. Right. Go ahead.
not the one, not the tower. I saw that in movies basically. And but on the right, yeah, those are both locations that were internalized, but because I had seen them, one was like I said, like the bunker,
Right.
basically, where it was, it was just one of the areas of the bunker where it was just like concrete hallways and very dank and damp and just not great, and just these, you know, doors and doors basically of torture rooms, etc., whatever they wanted basically behind him. But you're trained to come to organize your torture memories within the same context internally. So that's like an area I actually saw, but then was internalized. And then the same with the torture chamber down there is that, yeah, that was like a physical location I was actually in at one point where, they did all the Hollywood shit to make it seem like a medieval torture chamber. There was just lots of torture implements and like just over the top, chains and blackness and grittiness and all this kind of crap just to make it more scary and intimidating, emotionally, in addition to the physical pain you're going to be going through for a kid, so that it physically looks like, how you.
Like the Hellraiser movies or some crap. Like it's like, you know,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
as
So it's almost like a set. It's,
visually.
it's
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
programming set, and but
Right.
then it's intentionally there to both create a lot of fear, but then also to be, have a very powerful emotional imprint,
Right.
so that they could build my own internal torture dungeon off of
Right.
that, and they would know exactly what it looked like, what it contained, etc.
Right. And that emotional spike of fear and emotions is what seals those trauma memories in. That's
Mm-hmm.
how, like, if you weren't emotionally traumatized, you wouldn't remember all this torture. You wouldn't remember all the programming. That's how they sew it in with their.
It's like snapshots, I mean, more like snap movies, I guess, because they're whole events. It's not just an image, but yeah, it's like burned into your brain, basically.
Right.
It's,
Yeah. Burned into our brain. That's a good note to end it on. So thank you so much for telling us more. I mean, really walking us further down the understanding. Um, like I'm always more interested in this, like the hierarchy of, the cult behind the cult, and I know that there's many factions of dark occult that are all working together. And who makes them work together? Who organizes that working together? And Dune does a very good job with this Bene Gesserit. Like they came to the planet years and years ago to seed a religion into the native folk, so that
mm-hmm.
it can be fruited out later, and for what they plan on having happen with their bloodline people being, I mean, it's like, whoa. People should read the book. I mean, it's really, Frank Herbert did an amazing job. But anyway, it's a very good tool for describing this, and how can they all be, why are they all compliant with this higher order? Why don't they buck against the trend? Well, I mean, maybe it wasn't water torture for them like it was for you, but they've all been ritually tortured. They've all had the designated programming which to make those certain results. So then I mean, that's why there's no infighting, right? It's
Well,
because,
and I would like to say you can make a psychopath more than one way. That's the case for I think a lot of these bloodline people. Is that even my dad? I don't think that he personally went through a ton of sexual trauma growing up, basically. But I think that he was presented because his sisters were that by their psychopath dad. That's the other way you can kind of create this is early on you can make them realize like, okay, I can either be on the side of the abuser or on the side of and that in and of itself is a trauma and a torture to the kid is to be able to see loved ones being harmed. That is, but essentially, that's all I would say is not everyone that is enacting this has gone through the exact same stuff. And
right.
I would say most of the, and that's where I would still put them as slaves to a degree. Most of the dark mothers have because that's how they learn the stuff that they're perpetuating. But I think a lot of the people ruling in the upper echelons of this stuff is some of their kids go through this if they have to. But I think a lot more of them are also, just forced to witness this stuff. And then from an early age are forced to make this decision to be like, well, I can be on the side of hurting and, and those are the ones that I think a lot of times are the full on psychopaths and stuff, and the ones that are promoted through these bloodlines they're the ones that didn't have to have that much convincing,
Right.
basically, to decide to, be on the team of the winners, and to rather be part of the torturing than to be tortured themselves, and then the ones that they still want, that aren't interested in this, they go through more and more torture so that they end up on this end of the spectrum, having parts like this that have made that decision, but ultimately have always been on the side of not wanting to
Side of good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But there is a small proportion of people but I think a lot of them are the ones that are ultimately orchestrating this stuff, or not necessarily ones that have themselves gone through vast amounts of torture, but that
right.
yeah.
Yeah, they did the free will choice way back when, like your dad saw his sisters getting abused and knowing that made the free will choice. I'm going to be predator,
Yeah.
and that's what they want, the compliance and free will choice to be
Yeah.
evil. So they didn't have to convince him he's already evil. But then the stepwise progression, like John Euler tells us, brought him into at the end with the snuff porn and you know what I mean? Like how,
Mhm.
anyway, but that's like, I know we have a time limit and I thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
And, it's such a pleasure and it's always great talking with you.
Yeah, I hope any of it was able to provide any more elucidation, to
It always
any
does.
survivors that are watching or just, allies out there that are trying to understand the mechanics of all this crazy psychopathic system and everything and mind control, et cetera, I just hope it was able to help in those areas at all and provide a little bit more insight, I guess.
It always does. Like I said at the beginning, you're moving mountains. Like it just seems like, oh, you're just kind of talking, whatever. But you're like the amount of people that can hear you and what it really means, what you're saying, and we are understanding. Like this, you said before about how we are reacting with compassion and love to your stories, you and others like you. And
Exactly.
the more you do it, the more it shows the ones that are quiet that they can do this and there is a path to healing and they can speak their voice. And, we need their voice and we love their voice and we love them. Like we are
Self-forgiveness,
love.
but then forgiveness in society too, that
That's right.
there is a place for us, to be part of the healing as opposed to part of the damage.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not like, oh, look at the damage. We're like, hey, look at the beauty of the human that can survive this and become this beautiful person like yourself, and to be a family, to have a family, to be a mother, to make real life on your terms, not for them, not like making a, what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing. And we're so proud of you, and we're so glad that you're doing it and that you're speaking your voice. And where can listeners find your voice? Please tell us.
I'm still only on YouTube. Hopefully, I'm going to be changing that. I want to get like at least a Rumble channel or something going on, especially since Emma's The Imagination podcast got taken off and everything. And like, I hate doing anything technology related, but you can still find me on YouTube for now. Soon to be Rumble. And I hope to start doing a series where I can just do audio too, maybe on like iTunes or something. But for now, it's Desert Dakinis, Dakini, A Survivor's Perspective is the name of my channel. And I don't do a whole lot of testimony there. It's mainly just about focusing on explaining dissociation, programming, and healing from trauma.
That's right. You help to understand the nuts and bolts and how to turn them right and get it all fix your brains. That's the important
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And if people are listening, want to hear about your survivor testimony, they can either find some of our earlier episodes on Wake the Dead here, but the shows that you've done with Emma on the Imagination podcast.
Yeah, they're
They're
on Rumble.
really right. And she keeps her mouth shut and lets you talk. Like, I don't know how I can do that. Like, I wouldn't. I'm always interrupting. She's like
I
the
like
opposite of me.
conversation. I appreciate
Right?
it.
Anyway, God bless her for what she's doing. I'm glad that she has that space and she can do that. And I'm glad that she's branching out from YouTube too. And yourself, if you need any help, like, I'm on like 3 other ones besides YouTube. So, and I'll give you all the advice and help offline, off the air. And just
I
ask.
appreciate it, Sean.
It's great.
You're always a
It's
big
great.
supporter.
Awesome. Yeah. So much love, and thank you again for joining. And all the links will be below for the listeners to click. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Awesome. Well, we will, and thank you, listeners, for listening. And we will see you next time on Wake the Dead.